There's something most men never fully understand. Why her regret means nothing to a high-value man. Because at a certain point, it stops being about her emotions, stops being about apologies, messages, or what could have been, and starts being about something deeper: self-respect, direction, and control. Why her regret means nothing to a high-value man isn't just a phrase. It's a mindset shift, a quiet separation between reacting and rising above it all. And once that shift happens, there's no going back to the old version of himself. No more negotiation, no emotional confusion, no reopening what's already closed. No more negotiation, no emotional confusion, no reopening what's already closed. If this message resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Most men here are on the same path of growth, clarity, and emotional strength. We're currently pushing toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support truly helps build this community of high-value men who are done repeating the same patterns. Topic 1. The illusion of closure. Why most men wait for her regret. He's seen it happen more than once. The breakup happens, she walks away, and deep down, part of him is still waiting. It's not something he admits out loud, but it's there, that quiet expectation that one day she'll come back regretting it. Like that moment will finally bring peace, validation, or the answer that was missing. And here's what most men don't realize: that waiting has very little to do with her, and everything to do with what's still unresolved inside him. Because see, most men aren't actually waiting for her to return. They're waiting for what it would mean. They're waiting for that "I was wrong" moment, as if it would prove he was enough all along. It's like an emotional closure that never really happened. Simple example. He moves on with life, works, grows, improves, but still feels a slight sting when she crosses his mind. That's not necessarily missing her. That's unfinished emotional business. And here's the subtle shift most people miss. A high-value man starts to realize that closure doesn't come from the outside. Not from a message, not from regret, not from a dramatic comeback. If he depends on that, he'll always be emotionally tied to something that already ended. And that's where many men get stuck, because without realizing it, they keep living like that chapter is still open. And that completely changes how they respond to whatever comes next. Topic 2. Regret is about her pain, not your value. There's a quiet trap that catches a lot of men, especially after intense relationships. When she comes back regretful, asking for another chance, or showing nostalgia, he automatically sees it as validation. Like finally, his value is being recognized. But what most men don't see is this: her regret isn't about who he is. It's about what she's feeling in that moment. Because regret usually comes from loss, not admiration. She misses the presence, the stability, the attention, the way he made her feel. But that doesn't necessarily mean she suddenly respects him more, or that her perception of him has evolved. It's emotional, not logical. It's about the emptiness she's feeling now, not a deeper understanding of what she lost. A sharp man starts noticing patterns. He remembers that even when she had all of that, she still chose to leave. So what actually changed? Him, or the situation? Simple example. It's like only appreciating silence after living in chaos. The silence didn't become more valuable. The discomfort just got louder. And that's where he starts stepping back emotionally, seeing things more strategically, opening the door to a deeper understanding of what actually defines a man's value. Topic 3. The high-value man doesn't need emotional validation. There's a subtle but powerful difference between two types of men. One needs someone to tell him he's enough. The other just knows. And that difference changes everything. Because when a man depends on emotional validation, from a woman, from approval, or even from an apology, he's unknowingly handing over control of his self-worth. The high-value man operates differently. He doesn't ignore emotions, but he doesn't follow them blindly either. His identity is built on actions, discipline, and consistency. Simple example. While others are analyzing texts, decoding signals, or waiting for her move, he's focused on building himself. Career, body, mindset, circle. He reads, invests in himself, hold standards. Books like Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me reflect this exact mindset. And here's what happens next. Once he no longer needs validation, his behavior shifts naturally. He stops reacting and starts choosing. He's no longer obligated to accept someone back just because she regrets it. Ironically, that's exactly what makes him more attractive. Not forced indifference, but real emotional independence. And that shift creates a new problem most men aren't ready for, when she comes back for reasons that have nothing to do with real respect. Topic 4. When she comes back, she's responding to absence, not respect. There's a moment most men misread. After silence, distance, and time, she comes back. Sometimes with a simple message, sometimes with emotion, nostalgia, or even regret. And this is where the mistake happens. He assumes it's respect, recognition, or real change. But most of the time, it's something much simpler and much more misleading. Absence creates impact. When a man truly walks away without drama, chasing, or begging, he leaves a void. And that void feels uncomfortable. Not because she suddenly respects him more, but because she lost access to what he provided. Simple example. It's like only realizing something mattered once it's gone. That's not transformation. That's reaction. And emotional reaction rarely lasts. The high-value man starts seeing this clearly. He watches behavior, not words. He understands her return isn't necessarily evolution. It's a response to discomfort. And that's where many men fall back into the same cycle. Confusing emotional intensity with real change. Once he separates those two things, everything shifts. Because reacting stops making sense, and real strength starts showing up quietly but powerfully. Topic 5. The power shift. Why indifference is more attractive than revenge. Many men, when they feel disrespected, go into reaction mode. They want to prove something, show they're doing better, stronger, more desired, sometimes even fantasizing about the moment she finally sees it. But here's the truth. That need to prove something is still attachment. It's just a different form of it. The high-value man does something far rarer. He doesn't play the game. No emotional revenge, no intentional performance. He just moves on. And that creates a silent power shift. Simple example. While others post subtle messages, chase attention, or jump into new relationships for validation, he stays quiet. He builds. He lives. No performance, no audience. And this is what most people miss. Real indifference is more powerful than any attempt to trigger a reaction. Because it can't be controlled. It can't be manipulated. It just exists. And when she realizes that, something shifts. Not necessarily in her actions, but in the dynamic itself. And that level of control requires emotional mastery most men haven't developed yet, especially when the past shows up again, looking familiar enough to tempt old patterns. Topic 6. High-value men move forward, not backward. There's a pattern that separates average men from grounded men, and it shows in silence. While many keep looking back, replaying memories and possibilities, the high-value man commits to forward motion. Not out of coldness, but clarity. Going back to something that already failed without real change isn't maturity. It's repetition disguised as hope. He's learned, often the hard way, that growth requires direction, and direction doesn't mix with emotional nostalgia. Simple example. Instead of reopening an old connection just because she returned, he invests in new growth. Career, body, business, mindset, new environments. He doesn't romanticize the past. He extracts lessons from it. And the interesting part is this. Moving forward doesn't need attention. It's quiet, internal, consistent. But it changes everything around him. Because when a man truly decides not to go back, he stops negotiating standards and starts attracting entirely different experiences. But that's also where the real test begins, when the past starts looking just tempting enough to question his discipline. Topic 7. The danger of reopening closed doors. There's a delicate moment most men don't talk about. when the door is closed, but not locked. And that's where danger lives. Because when she returns with emotion, familiarity, and nostalgia, he starts considering something his logic already closed. Not because he forgot, but because emotion tries to rewrite history. The problem is, reopening that door rarely leads anywhere new. Most of the time, it leads right back into the same cycle, just heavier. He starts remembering the patterns, the compromises, the moments he had to shrink himself to keep things alive. Simple example, going back to a place that drained you, hoping it somehow feels different now, without any real evidence of change. The high-value man doesn't act on emotion alone. He looks for consistency, time, and real behavior. And most importantly, he respects his own history. Because impulsive emotional decisions can cost months, even years, of progress. And this is where most men fail, confusing opportunity with repetition. Once he sees that difference clearly, he stops asking, "How does this feel?" and starts asking, "What does this cost me?" Topic 8. Respect is built in absence, not in second chances. Respect is not something you ask for. It's not something you recover easily. It's something built over time, especially in how you handle absence. Once a man understands this, his entire perception of second chances changes. Because absence reveals more than presence ever could. In presence, emotions are loud, confusing, reactive. But in absence, things settle. And in that space, a man's true value becomes visible, not through words, but through what he continues building without being seen. Simple example, if he disappears and still keeps growing, improving, evolving, that sends a stronger message than any explanation ever could. The high-value man doesn't treat second chances as emotional obligations. He doesn't confuse kindness with automatic access. He looks for real change, consistency, maturity, and most importantly, he asks, does this add value, or is it just the same cycle with a new label? Because once he's honest about that answer, he realizes something important. Respect isn't restored through emotion. It's reinforced through boundaries. Topic 9. Emotional discipline, the trait that separates men. There's one trait that separates men who react from men who lead their lives: emotional discipline. And this isn't about shutting emotions off. It's about feeling everything, without letting it drive decisions. That's where most men lose control, especially when the past comes back with emotion and familiarity. Without emotional discipline, intensity gets mistaken for meaning. If she shows emotion, it feels like destiny. If she shows regret, it feels like change. But the high-value man slows everything down internally before reacting externally. Simple example. Instead of replying instantly out of impulse, he reads patterns, context, and history first. Not cold, just aware. And that's the difference. Emotional discipline doesn't remove feeling. It removes control from feeling. He doesn't act to relieve loneliness, ego, or nostalgia. He acts based on direction and standards. And once that level is reached, things that once felt overwhelming start losing their power. But then comes the final test, when the past returns not to trigger emotion, but to test identity. Topic 10. The silent message of a man who doesn't look back. There's something powerful about a man who doesn't look back. Not arrogance, not ego, but internal consistency. He simply doesn't revisit what he's already processed, understood, and outgrown. And that alone sends a message no words could ever replace. When a man truly moves forward, he doesn't announce it. He doesn't perform it, he just continues. And ironically, that's what makes it so noticeable. While others are still stuck reacting, checking, revisiting, he's already building new versions of himself, new standards, new direction. He doesn't compete with the past, because he left that game entirely. And the impact isn't external, it's internal. A man like that doesn't need the past to acknowledge his value anymore, because he's no longer dependent on it. And that changes everything about how he moves in life. But the final truth is almost silent. Real power was never about who came back, who apologized, or who regretted leaving. It was always about the man who decided once and for all not to return. Conclusion. So now he understands something most men only realize after wasting time and emotion. Her regret was never the prize, never the validation, never the answer he was chasing. Because a high-value man doesn't measure himself by who comes back. He measures himself by who he becomes when no one does. And once that clicks, everything starts to quiet down. The overthinking fades. The emotional reactions lose their grip. What's left is direction, control, and a calm confidence that doesn't need approval. Now the question becomes simple. How long are you going to let emotional echoes make your decisions? How many times will you confuse attention with value or regret with respect? Because at some point, every man has to choose. Stay tied to the past, or step into the version of himself who doesn't look back anymore. If this hit you in any way, subscribe to the channel. Not just for content, but for consistency in mindset, growth, and direction as a man. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers, and every man who joins is part of that standard. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next, because this journey is only getting deeper.